Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. This is Sarah Huckins, Partnership Manager for Island Press, and I am excited to welcome you to today's webinar, Urban Agriculture and Creating a Sustainable Foodscape. Today's webinar is put on in collaboration with our partner, Food Tank. Food Tank's mission is to build a global community for safe, healthy, nourished eaters. Food Tank supports environmentally, socially, and economically sustainable ways of alleviating hunger, obesity, and poverty. Through their work, they create networks of people, organizations, and content to push for food system change. We are very lucky to have Danielle Nierenberg, co-founder and president of Food Tank, as our moderator today. And here are our panelists for the session. You can see Danny in the top left. And in addition to co-founding Food Tank, Danielle also conducts extensive on-the-ground research, traveling to more than 70 countries across sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. She has met with thousands of farmers and farmers groups, scientists and researchers, policymakers and government leaders, students and academics, as well as journalists, documenting what's working to help alleviate hunger and poverty while protecting the environment. Danielle is also the editor of the forthcoming Island Press publication entitled Nourish Planet, Sustainability in the Global Food System. Danny has worked extensively with the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition and experts across the globe to develop a plan for feeding ourselves sustainably. We are excited to have Danny as our moderator today, and we look forward to the conversation with our panelists. But before we dive in, here's just a quick look at our agenda. Danny will say a few words and introduce us to our panelists. Then Michael, Venus, and Lauren will provide some background to their work. After the presentations, Danny will lead a discussion with our panelists on the role of urban agriculture and the creation of alternative foodscapes in promoting a more sustainable food system. And at the end of the webinar, we will be taking questions from the audience. So we encourage you to participate by entering questions through the GoTo platform. In the toolbar, you'll see there's a section that you can type questions in directly to our panelists. And at the very end, we'll also be offering 20% off discount codes for Danny and Michael's books. So stay tuned for that slide. But for now, I'll let Danny take it away.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thanks to Island Press and all of the panelists for joining us. I think this is going to be a really rich discussion. As Sarah said, I'm the president of Food Tank, which part of our mission is to really highlight stories of hope and success in the food system. And again, as Sarah mentioned, highlight what's working on the ground and share the stories from people, who are literally in the field doing different kinds of work. One of the issues that we highlight is sort of the role and growth of urban agriculture across the globe. And this is also something that we highlight in the book Nourish Planet, which will come out later this year. So for, the sort of global picture of urban agriculture is that at least 1 billion people are practicing urban agriculture around the globe in cities and suburbs and on rooftops and backyard lots, on land they don't own, on land they do own. And according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, around 15 to 20% of all food production is coming from cities. Urban agriculture can have a variety of benefits, including providing access to fresh, healthy, nutritious, and affordable fruits and vegetables and other crops. And it can help bring communities together, creating more green spaces and providing leadership for youth and other economic opportunities. So I'm really honored to be moderating this discussion because our panelists all come from very different backgrounds, but are doing extraordinary things to sort of talk about the role of urban agriculture and also things like access and affordability. And how we can use food as a tool to bring everyone together. So let me just introduce everyone quickly, and then I'd like to just jump into discussion and then get questions from all of you who are listening today. So I'm excited to introduce Michael Carolan. He's the author of No One Eats Alone, as Sarah said, Food as a Social Enterprise, an associate dean for research for the College of Liberal Arts at Colorado State University. Throughout his career, Michael has published more than 150 peer-reviewed articles and chapters, and he's an expert on a number of different things, including environmental and agricultural policy and the sociology of food systems and agriculture. We also have with us Venus Williams. She's the executive director of Alice's Garden, a community garden in Milwaukee that provides models of regenerative farming, community cultural development, and economic enterprises for the global landscape. She has been the visionary behind many Milwaukee organizations and projects, and currently serves as the executive director of Alice's Garden Urban Farm, and the minister for the Table, a community garden and training center. And then we have, our last but not least, Lauren Shweder Biel, who is the executive director and co-founder of DC Greens. She is currently serving on the DC Mayor's Commission on Healthy Schools and Youth, as well as the Department of Health's Obesity Subcommittee, and received the Exemplary Civic Activism Award from the DC Federation of Citizens Associations in 2011. So what I'd like to do right now is just jump into this discussion. And Michael, my question for you is, for any author, why this book and why right now? Why was it important for you to talk about food as a social enterprise?
Well, thank you, and thanks again for the invitation. I appreciate being here. So I guess to answer your question, I'll answer it to some degree with a question in and of itself, and that is, how many of us think that the political system in the U.S. is broken? Which I know is a strange question, because that at its face seems to have nothing to do with food, but in some respects I think it has everything to do with food, or at least potentially. And so on this slide, whoops, there's a slight delay. So in April of last year, the Cook Political Report, which is an independent, nonpartisan newsletter that analyzes U.S. elections, released some data confirming those suspicions that there does seem to be something about the U.S. political landscape that is broken. And in this document, it's interesting because we talk a lot about blue and red states, but when you drill down into it, today's political and social divisions can be recorded at the county, zip code, and even neighborhood levels. And so the chart you see here documents that in 1997, there were some 140 districts that were scored by the Political Report as being competitive. And in 2016, that number was reduced to only 72 districts. And I know conventional wisdom places the blame squarely on what's referred to commonly as gerrymandering. But what the report argues, and other political scientists have since argued too, is that wisdom is impartial. And so when you look at, for instance, minimally altered districts where there wasn't any gerrymandering happening, the electorate has simply become more homogenous, which is to say our districts, our communities are to a certain degree looking the same, thinking the same, praying the same, and voting the same. And it's a phenomenon known as geographic sorting. And so I find this really interesting because we have all this talk in food spaces about reducing spatial distance, right? Local food, but knowing your farmer and the fields that she works in. But what good is this if we don't want to get to know them? So you might even say to some degree that some of these groups are living in different worlds, which brings me to some of the research that I've been really focusing on of late. I'll start with looking at, see if this will advance. I'll start with looking at what's known as the rural-urban divide. The literary critic Raymond Williams wrote a book a few decades ago now titled Keywords. And his argument was that we need to understand those words that we all use, but we often have different meanings related to those words. And his argument was that if we can understand the assumptions behind those keywords and how those keywords differ amongst groups, we can begin to understand the ideological worldviews that exist within groups that are difficult to otherwise capture. And so I tried to do this with some recent research where I was looking studying conventional farmers in North Dakota, and I was looking at an urban land cooperative in a city that I'm not able to mention because we dealt with some sensitive questions, and in order to elicit participation, I had a promise that I'd keep the city that was participating anonymous. But one of the things that I did is I asked these different groups, among other things, what does autonomy mean to you? And what does social justice mean to you? And I essentially recorded their responses, and I inserted those responses in word cloud software. And and I produced these results, which is really quite fascinating. I think I might have skipped ahead one slide with regard to the social justice slide, but the autonomy slide is actually the most interesting. So for the conventional group, for them to understand autonomy, you have one group of people linking autonomy to individualism and another group linking autonomy to interdependence. And so in some respects, these represent polar opposite worldviews in some ways, because the individualism represents kind of an ontology of individualism, which is tightly held in many corners of this country. But then the urban land cooperative was representing to some degree what you might refer to as a collectivist ontology that centered more around the importance of cooperation and interdependence and collaboration, mutual support, and things like that. So this leads to my final slide. How do we repair some of these or heal some of these divides? And this gets to, I think, an underappreciated aspect of some of today's alternative food networks and practices. So not long ago, I conducted a rather novel study where I interviewed roughly 100 eaters twice, first before they engaged in some of these spaces, which were farmers markets and community-supported agriculture arrangements and other things. And then they interviewed them again 2 years later, after they've had some exposure to these practices. And I also interviewed a control group of 106 conventional eaters who had no regular participation in these spaces. And I was curious about how these experiences shaped respondents' feelings about food. Now, I can show a bunch of numbers and tables, but I'll spare you all that, and I'll just get to one key finding, and I'll end it there. I discovered that while many spoke about taste and health as principal reasons for buying food within these spaces when they were first interviewed, those justifications changed by the time of the second interview. And through methods I don't have time to get into either, I was able to link those changes in attitudes to their involvement within these spaces. So for most of these people, they began to prioritize things like community participation and social justice and sustainability, whereas 2 years prior, they were prioritizing taste and health. And so to put the matter simply and to conclude, the experiences for some in these spaces created empathy or created a citizen eater, which is why I am hopeful, because our politics needs to figure out a way in which we can heal some of these divides. So in conclusion, it's, we talk about how food nourishes us, but I think we owe it upon ourselves to better understand the extent to which this is true, and to encourage those practices that facilitate this nourishment in its broadest sense. And I have a sense that we'll be hearing echoing tales of this from the other participants in this panel. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Michael. That was excellent. So Venus, I'm going to turn to you now. And Michael just talked about this idea in creating more opportunities for people to come together through these different spaces, whether it's a farmer's market or a CSA pickup, and how people are doing that because they're interested in not just eating really good food, but they're interested in creating community and finding ways to encourage social justice. I'd love to hear from you how you think the work that you're doing at Alice's Garden is creating that kind of community that will help people become the citizen eaters that Michael spoke about.
Right, indeed. Thank you. I love that last slide where Michael takes a look at how the urban context works together. And for us, it is without a doubt a collaborative model. So as you look at the slide there, that is Alice's Garden. It is a 2.2 acre urban farm that has been around since 1972. It has not looked like it does there since 1972. That is due to the work of some incredible partners, including the Center for Resilient Cities. And so for us at Alice's Garden, we use gardening as the carrot, pun intended, to get people to come through the gates to impact their entire quality of life. So food is the mechanism to connect people to one another, to build stronger and healthier neighbors and neighborhoods, but really to use this farm as the platform for social entrepreneurship, community cultural development, and all types of interaction amongst folks who live around the garden and people who are just in the greater Milwaukee area. One of the things that we really support at Alice's Garden is ethnobotany. And ethnobotany is the study of traditional knowledge and the customs of a people or peoples as it concerns plants and their culinary, medicinal, religious, and other uses. So it's important for us to understand food as medicine, food as a social interaction tool, food in the setting of a table as a way to bring people together, to discuss the things that we need to celebrate in our cities, but also the things that concern us. So to use an outdoor green space, the landscape, and it looks, you can look at that photo there and you can see that we are right in the city. The reason why that is so clear is that that used to be a vibrant African-American community. A highway was to be built. Everyone was displaced and the highway was never built. And so that context alone is a reason to talk about how social needs and civil rights and what it means to be an active participant in all levels of a city come together here at Alice's Garden. You could go to the next slide also. So we have, how do we engage community? How do we look at what it means to be an active urban participant in the food movement? We like to say, first of all, that, you know, it's not a movement, that for our folks, for my ancestral heritage, food has been at the center of who we are and will always be for generations. So we really look at how we can use our history, how we can use the word culture in agriculture, because culture is the key piece for us in agriculture, how we can use everything that we have learned historically to bring people together to create not just a healthier food system, but we're growing entrepreneurs. We're introducing people to career paths as it relates to food and the environment. We are really looking at what it means to look at food through the lens of health and wellness. So whether that is through our herbal CSA, herbs are my passion, and so unapologetically, they are a huge piece of what we do at Alice's Garden. So we have an herbal CSA. We have an herbal apprentice program. We have a farmer's training project that has 3 tracks, and one of those tracks is an herbal apprentice program that has currently 54 apprentices, 7 of which have already birthed businesses. So the development of people and the health of a community and the development of jobs and careers and a healthier city is some of the wonderful things that happen at Alice's Garden. We understand the need for better health practices and better eating practices. And for us, we get at that not just by growing food, but by constantly bringing people together, whether it is under that pavilion that you see right there. We have an herbal labyrinth that we use as a healing tool and a wellness tool for everyone who comes through. We have a green space, a grassed green space where everyone comes together quite often. So whether we're talking our yoga in the garden, which is in year 11, or is it 12 this season, coming up, our community conversation circles, our movie nights in the garden, our Black Lives Matter event. We have a celebration of new life. So it really is understanding an urban farm, not just as a place to grow food, but to grow the health of an entire community. And I'll just pause there. Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
Sorry, I was on mute. This is Danny back, your moderator. I just thought that was a fantastic presentation, Venus. Thank you so much. And I love this idea of growing people, not just growing food, and being able to look at food very holistically and through a lot of different lenses that contribute to economic and personal health, as well as the health of the environment. Lauren, I'd like to turn to you now, and you're working with a lot of local institutions and things that, you know, we don't always think about when we're talking about food, but we should be, whether it's the Department of Health or the NGOs that are working on health outcomes in communities. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about the role of local governments and institutions. And again, back to this question that Michael posed at first, how do we create this citizenry of healthy eaters?
Great. Thanks so much. I mean, this is already such a rich conversation, and I'm thrilled to be able to contribute to it. I think, you know, for us, you know, urban agriculture is definitely a piece of the story, but, you know, we are very interested in these alternative foodscapes, you know, that really do bridge together diverse sectors. So just to back up a little bit, you know, DC Greens, our mission is that we use the levers of food education, food access, and food policy to advance food justice in the nation's capital. As you mentioned, we do work across sectors. So we're in schools, we're working with the healthcare system, we're working with farmers markets, with government, with impacted community members, and we're doing sort of both direct service work and advocacy work. And I think that our direct service work in a lot of ways is set up to build kind of communities of practice that can then shift larger systems. We're very much about working towards large scale system change in the District of Columbia. And, you know, we often say that, you know, our role is to do the work of collaboration. So, you know, there's a lot of, you know, in DC, there are a lot of folks that care really deeply about the food system, you know, from all of the sectors that I mentioned. There's also, you know, wonderful nonprofits here that are doing a range of work. And there's a lot of spaces where people come together to work collaboratively, but often, you know, each of those nonprofits has to go back and do what it is that they are missioned to do, you know, whether that's running a specific school garden or a specific farmer's market. And we really feel like we're here to do the work of collaboration and kind of occupy those spaces in between. Can you all still hear me? I had a little note that I was dipping out of sound. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so, you know, we use a lot of different metaphors to describe our work. You know, sometimes I say we're grease, we're glue, we're a trellis to the food system in DC. The one that I think is really appropriate to the themes of this is you know, we're a bellows and we're out looking for sparks. And, you know, for us, we feel like there are so many people inside of every sector that are desperately trying to connect with each other to build a healthier and more equitable food system. And if we can be sort of wind at the sails of that movement, we're really able to bring people together to actually build these citizen eaters that Michael mentioned. And at the core, you know, we believe access to healthy food is a basic human right. So I'm just going to very quickly go through a couple of images from our work. Hopefully this is going to advance. Okay, so one of the programs that, went too fast. One of the programs that we run is the DC Produce Plus program. This is a program that we run together with the health department and with farmers markets across the city. This is a program where anybody who receives SNAP, WIC, TANF, SSI disability, Medicaid, really any federal benefit can go to any of the farmers markets, 53 farmers markets, and automatically receive $10 to spend on fruits and vegetables, and they can go twice a week. This has been an incredibly popular program in DC. We have, you know, lines of people coming every week to every market. There's 9,500 residents that participate in the program, and over $800,000 was distributed through this program. To run this program, we have hired market champions. So, you know, these are Produce Plus customers who are extremely passionate about farmers markets in their community. They're passionate about making sure that their neighbors have access to healthy food. And we've hired market champions to really do what we call community inreach, and to make sure that they're cultivating community spaces in their own communities. So, you know, a lot of times farmers markets that open up in low resource communities are conceptualized as food access points. And, it really strips those markets of all of the things that actually make a farmer's market a space that you would want to inhabit, and a space that actually kind of moves people into deeper relationships with each other. And so, market champions are, they're spreading the word about the market. They're helping people, try new recipes. They're figuring out what kind of music, what kind of events, what kinds of vendors, are really needed at the markets that are in their own neighbors. And they're creating a sense of community at these farmers market spaces. Just trying to advance here. Got a little bit of a delay. If someone could advance for me, that would be great. The other thing that we run, too far. We run this farmers market, the Produce Plus program, together with what we call the DC Farmers Market Brigade. So this is, we had last season 285 volunteers from all across the city coming together to distribute these checks at all of these different farmers markets. We were really intentional in our recruitment, and finding folks who are already Produce Plus customers that really want to also contribute their time to creating, community food access inside their own communities. And so 75 of our volunteers last season were customer volunteers. In total, there's over 4,000 hours contributed by volunteers across the city. And we found that our customer volunteers were our most committed volunteers. It was really, we were able to create spaces for folks that care to come together around an alternative foodscape in their community. And, these are many communities that have had incredible structural disinvestment around food. So, these are communities that are lacking access to grocery stores, lacking access to, to land, lacking access to, all of the kinds of spaces that do create robust community food spaces. And to be able to create these farmers market spaces that had abundance that was sort of from the government, allowed community members to really come together. We very much believe in supporting communities of practice, and we do that in a number of different ways. This is an image from our schools program. We have something called the Trellis program, where we support school garden coordinators across the city to really come together and do knowledge sharing with each other. We also lead workshops where these educators are able to learn skills about how to integrate cooking classes into the classroom. We run something called Rooting DC together with a range of nonprofits in the city that, these are urban agriculture nonprofits that are doing information sharing with each other. And, I think that these communities of practice are really a essential base for moving any kind of issue, and for ensuring that you've got sharing that is happening. This is an image of our community advocates. So we also have a community advocates program where folks that have a lived experience of food insecurity, we hire them to embark on a training program where they're able to learn about how the DC budget works, how the larger food system works. We're able to kind of learn from them what it is that they care about, and then make sure that they are in spaces where they're able to influence policy decisions. And many of these folks really came to our organization through the Produce Plus program. So it was sort of the existence of this new space where folks could come together that really allowed folks to find each other, and allowed us to then continue to resource people to really be active in helping to shift and shape the food system that they inhabit. We last year held something called the grocery walk, where, and again, trying to advance, this is an image from the grocery walk. About 500 community members came out and walked the 2 miles from, the only grocery store in Ward 8, which is DC's highest poverty part of the city, walked 2 miles to sort of the downtown area just to really display the food injustice that is at play in this community. And, this creation of citizen eaters, of, folks who are actively shaping the food system that they want to see, can only happen really when you have folks able to come together to work together. I'm going to I have a couple more slides and then I will kick back to you. Another thing that we do is we have all the way through these slides. We have a 1 acre urban farm in DC that also is a really important convening space for us. And I love what Vina said about, it's not just about growing food, and particularly in a place like DC where, land is, it's very valuable. It's very small plots usually that we're able to farm. The highest value of these spaces really is not going to be food production, but what it can be is creating spaces for people to come together, to decrease social distance, and also to increase kind of cohesion within a single kind of community of practice. So, this is a set of our volunteers, our market champions, our community advocates coming together on the farm to break bread together. And, again, I think for us, making sure that we look at and we're lucky in DC, we have very progressive government agencies that really understand the value of this work. But, for us, it has been very important to have policy partners at the table to make sure that we're really setting the groundwork for the continued building of these alternative foodscapes that can really, what we think, really shift the food system.
Great, Lauren, are you done? Is that
I'm done. I'm sorry. Yes, that's my last slide.
So this is Danny Beck. Lauren, that was great, and you talked about a lot of important things, and Michael started off his presentation talking about how we're at this sort of very as we all know, and as you in DC especially know, at this really crucial time in sort of American politics where people feel very divided. And you mentioned how some of the projects you're working on are bringing policy partners to the table. But I'd love for you to talk about, because, whatever, a lot of the programs you're talking about are getting funding at the federal level. Are you fearful that, DC Produce Plus and some of the other programs that you're working on will be affected by this political discord that's going on in Washington and really around the country?
That's a great question. We have been really fortunate that actually every program that I talked about is funded at the municipal level. So, every single one of these programs is really funding that is coming, from our cities. And I really believe, this is sort of a soapbox I've been on for about a year now, but ever since the Flint crisis, it became very clear to me that we expect our cities to build the infrastructure that is going to guarantee clean water to all people, and when that doesn't happen, we're outraged by that. But it really wasn't always that way, and it wasn't until the turn of the century when a connection was made between cholera and clean water that cities started to see this as a public health issue that they needed to be investing in. And I think we are in that cholera moment right now for food, where, the connections have been really clearly made between sort of the unhealthy food that's being piped into communities of color particularly, and the rates of diet-related chronic illnesses that are plaguing those same communities, like diabetes and hypertension, et cetera. And I think we need to be expecting our cities to recognize that it is their role to build that, that pipe structure that will make sure that all citizens have access to healthy food. And I don't necessarily mean giving away food. I mean, making sure that there's healthy food in our schools. I mean, Medicaid waivers so that, patients can access healthy food as part of their prescription plans. Tax incentives for grocery stores. Produce Plus is a piece of that. And I think one thing that we've seen with the Produce Plus program, not only has it created this very vibrant, an active set of community members that are sort of raising their hands and coming together, but it is also, shored up markets to be able to open in low resource neighborhoods where previously the farmers had been too nervous about sort of taking that leap. And it also, a lot of times there's a tension that comes up between the producers and low-income customers where, or really with any customers where, some folks are arguing for, cheaper prices and other folks want, a fair wage. And there's a tension there. And I feel like a program like Produce Plus is able to kind of allow government intervention to split the difference so that everybody can really win. And I think that that's the most positive use of a government. Obviously, we're nervous about sort of the tone that's being set on the federal level, but we're very confident that our local city officials understand the importance of the work in this arena and are sort of ready to shore it up.
That's great. I mean, I think that's a good, thing to point out that cities, because of a lack of leadership at the federal level, not just in the United States, but in other countries as well, cities are really taking the lead on a lot of this, whether it's food or climate action plans, a lot of the issues that a lot of us care about. So that's exciting. I do want to remind people who are watching online that you can answer questions using your webinar control panel. It's in the middle. You can type out your question and we'll be happy to ask it to the panelists. So Michael and Venus, one of the listeners wants to know, how are you both defining healthy food and how do you get folks to buy into that definition? So I'd love to hear from you, Michael, first. What do you define as healthy food? And then Venus, if you could jump in and build on or disagree with what Michael has to say.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I guess for me, and part of it is undoubtedly an artifact of me being a social scientist. But when I think about healthy food, or for that matter, when I think about sustainability, or when I think about well-being or development or anything like that, I think about it in a very holistic sort of way. And so I think about it in the context of healthy food as being more than just about the nutrients, for instance, more than nutritionism. I think about it as creating healthy individuals, healthy households, healthy communities, a healthy planet. So I think about it in that very broad sense. And so that's why I'm also really interested in the panelists are clearly as well about emphasizing that, these local alternative foodscapes, it's not just, although this is an important piece, it's not just about nutrition. It's not just about food access, although incredibly important, but it's not just about creating jobs, as some of my economist friends like to talk about, but it's also about creating citizens, about creating healthy communities, about building bridges rather than building walls. And just my last point, which ties on to something that Lauren and Danny were just talking about, another role I think for the cities in all of this as well, is that we've been having, there's a lot of energy, and great energy around, say, urban food plans. And one of my soapboxes in the last 12 months have been engaging with particularly partners in Denver, but I've had conversations with the Toronto Food Policy Council and some other food policy councils, is thinking about urban food plans in ways that also, to get to something that I never had a chance to really elaborate much more on my slides, but involve urban food plans in ways that might also involve the rural countryside. And so I think about in the context of Denver here, where they have these initiatives and these plans of, say, increasing fruit and vegetable consumption of Colorado produced fruits and vegetables and whole grains, et cetera, by a fairly significant percentage. Well, since we're talking about so much, it's very likely that a good portion of that is probably not going to be able to be raised within the city limits of Denver itself. So having conversations with urban or rural partners and rural communities and finding ways in which some of these urban food plans or regional food plans might be ways in which they benefit not only urban consumers and urban activists and urban growers, but also ways that might actually help rural areas as well. Because, there's speaking with farmers, there is some degree of animosity amongst them because they see all this energy, or at least they perceive this energy around urban agriculture, and they wonder, in some areas that's their entire commodity, or their entire economy and community is dependent upon food production, and now they in their eyes they see that being taken away from them by urban spaces as well. So I think another role for cities might be ways in which having these food policy plans that also engage with rural partners and rural communities in a way that benefits everybody and creates a win-win So that's my rather elaborate answer. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. Can you jump in?
Yes. So I failed to mention for those on the call that every time you see phone caller, that is me, Venus. So several things. To answer your original question, what do I mean when I say healthy food? So healthy food for me is not only talking about, food that comes up from the ground, the whole foods, the foods we recognize, the unpackaged foods, but it's also about the spirit and energy that is put into the food while it is being grown, and who's growing the food. So for me, a healthy tomato does not come from someone who is exploited to grow it. So I feel like we consume all of the energy and chemicals and justice or injustice, love, or whatever goes into the growing of that food, whether we acknowledge it or not. We're consuming even how it is grown. So when I talk about healthy food, it's not just about a tomato or a collard green or kale. It really is about how justly or unjustly this food was grown and what I'm consuming as I eat it. It's also about how we prepare food, because I could get the most beautiful batch of greens and overcook it in a way that it's no longer worth anything. And so when I discuss healthy food, it's not simply what is grown, but it's how it's grown, how it's prepared, and how it is shared. Again, the way we consume food contributes to our own health. So it's a complex piece. I also think it comes back to, so Lauren was talking about producers, and as I'm listening to Michael, if we're going to really change the landscape of food, we have to really look at growing farmers from urban areas, which is not necessarily the same as growing urban farmers. And I think this connects to a little bit of what Michael is saying. So part of my call and responsibility on the planet is to re-engage brown and Black people who have not been growing food, but there have been 80% of us still continue to grow food, even though you can't see it. You can't measure the food that we're growing in our own backyards or in our driveways and along the side of our homes. And that's something that simply cannot be measured, because so many of us never left the land. And I think that needs to be clearly stated. Just because it isn't it's not visible or measured or researched, it doesn't mean that we are not doing it. Having said that, I think it's really important for, in our communities, in our brown and Black communities, to heal our relationship with land, landowners, to become more owners and producers. That is where the impact is going to really take hold. So we can have as many programs and these government programs and projects and all the things that we all are engaged in. We're engaged in almost every single thing, plus more, as Lauren described in DC, through all of the different partners, whether we're talking about the Fondy Food Center and a number of different venues that I can name here in Milwaukee. But until the people in cities, a majority of the consumers become the producers, the landscape of health and wellness as it relates to food is not going to change. And so, Michael, your comment about the animosity from rural farmers is unfortunate. It's extremely unfortunate, because there's a bridge that needs to be built there. And part of that bridge is engaging folks from the urban context, as we do in our farmers training projects, to heal their relationship with land and this country that continues to exploit so many of us when it comes to food, but taking the power back and feeding ourselves. Those are the conversations that we strongly engage in at Alice's Garden and other partners throughout the city of Milwaukee. And this is where the impact of food, health, wellness, the strength of our neighborhoods will truly be impacted and changed.
That's so beautiful. If I could just jump in, this is Lauren. I just wanted to applaud everything that you just said. I thought that was beautiful. And I also I think it's really important that we remember that, the policy spheres of our sort of foodscapes also really need to be led by folks that actually have a lived experience of the issue that is being discussed. And I think that, in much the same way that you were speaking, so many policy spaces, the folks that are making decisions have actually, they're making a decision about a policy that's meant to deal with food access, and not a single person in the room has ever had a lived experience of food insecurity. And I think that it's essential that all of us that are working in the food space recognize that issues of community ownership should be central to every piece of the work that we're doing, whether it is opening up, or rather, I guess, healing the kind of historical aggressions that have happened through slavery and other kinds of issues where communities of color have been, their relationship to the land has been sullied in so many ways, whether it's that or whether it's, opening up policy spaces where folks lived experience and their knowledge is actually valued. Not just as sort of a check the box, but where, actual funds and budget lines are put towards making sure that people are in the room and sharing their wisdom and shaping the policy.
Great points, both Venus and Lauren. I think that, making sure that communities are involved at every step of the way is crucial for changing our policy paradigm on many of these issues. Venus, one of the things that you brought up, is something some of our people online are talking about. You talked about this importance of, sharing food, and, that brings to mind this idea of conviviality, and how we've sort of, like the title of Michael's book says, no one eats alone, but many of us do, right? We eat over our computers, we eat in our cars, we don't share food and meals as much as, earlier generations did in a lot of ways. So Venus and Lauren, I'd love to hear you both talk about the need for nutrition education and cooking education and eating education. We have to teach people in many ways how to eat again, and again, share those meals. So I'd love to hear some examples about what you both are doing. I have to warn you, we only have about 10 more minutes left for questions. So if we could keep our answers a little bit short so that we can get to as many questions from people online as possible, that would be great. Venus, do you want to talk about nutrition education first, and then Lauren, can you jump in?
Sure.
Sure. So for me, nutrition education, it happens in the garden. We have a program called Reclaiming and Nourishing Family Traditions where that happens, where there's actual chefs and cooks who come in and teach and do all of that. But I think the most important piece where it happens is when we're all at table together. So that's why our spiritual community is called The Table, a first century style community in the 21st century, because it really brings people to the table. We practice mindful eating within our communities. We have a project called Share a Meal, Share Your Story that I launched a couple of years ago through Creative Mornings Milwaukee. And tomorrow evening, I'm guest chef at a local restaurant, The Tandem, because it really is about bringing people back to the table to enjoy delicious, I hope, and nutritious food, but to also talk about their own food stories. A first step into nutrition is always the gathering of food stories. It's always entering the community with a listening ear, not a teaching ear, and recognizing that that community has way more to teach you than we do it, and starting with the shared story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we really hold dear the motto that change moves at the pace of trust. And I think, again, to echo what Venus was saying, I don't think you'll ever have, nutrition education that comes from outside of a community it's not going to work, A, and B, it never should be done. It's basically just a form of missionary zeal at that point. And I think that, making sure that we are resourcing folks with, knowledge that are inside the community. I mean, for us, our market champions who are, seniors that are, eager to teach their recipes to younger folks. I mean, that's really where we find the most meaningful and impactful. I don't even know if I'd call it nutrition education as much as sort of food knowledge and kind of cultural sharing. We have I mean, I think that cooking is a skill that has been lost across every demographic, but our elders have not lost it. And we need to make sure that they're front and center in helping to move along and create those kinds of thick relationships to be able to transmit knowledge in their own communities.
Great points. Thank you both, Lauren and Venus. Michael, Venus brought up this idea of gathering food stories and really listening and learning from communities. And I feel like that's one of the things that you set out to do with your book is really do a lot of interviews and listen to what people were most concerned about. Can you share a few stories that maybe shocked you or things that were particularly interesting?
Yeah, boy, it's difficult to narrow it down. I know we just have a few minutes, so I'll be really brief. Let me just say that, contextualize, I think part of the reason why I liked telling these stories is that it's easy for people to become really pessimistic about our food system, our foodscape, and the future in which it's heading. But what I've discovered is when you leave, academics are notorious about this. They spend more time behind a book and less time, unfortunately, out in the world talking to people. Social scientists at least have an excuse for being out there. And what I've learned is that, there's a lot of amazing energy going on, a lot of amazing activity, a lot of amazing innovation, a lot of amazing social entrepreneurialism that's happening that is really moving the needle around the world when it comes to trying to create meaningful change in our foodscapes. And part of the reason why I love my job and part of the reason why I wrote that book is I like collecting and telling these stories to perhaps give inspiration for people that are perhaps at the moment too pessimistic, in part because they haven't had a chance to engage with people that are doing these amazing things. And so, I mean, one thing that immediately came to mind when you were asking the question about nutritional literacy is I was also, thinking about it's beyond cooking. Knowing how to cook has been lost too, but we've also lost knowing even how to pick and select foods. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to where they're hesitant to go to a farmer's market, or even worse, hesitant to have their own garden because they don't know how to judge when something is ripe even and how to pick it. I talked to somebody a few months ago last summer, and they picked asparagus by pulling it out of the bed. And so there's all these aspects of knowledge that have been lost, and there's a lot of tacit knowledge that goes along with it as well. Just like if you were to ask somebody how they ride a bike, the only way you can learn how to ride a bike is by doing it, not by reading any sort of instructions. And so it's a very convivial activity, learning how to pass this knowledge along. It cannot be done just with some instructions. And that's why these stories are so incredibly important. And these communities of practice, as Lauren had mentioned, are so incredibly important for transmitting this knowledge too.
That's great. That's great. So I want to give you all each 30 seconds, and I will hold you to that. I'll cut you off. So I'm just warning you to sort of, what are your recommendations for everyone listening today on how to get more involved in their community? I know it's a big question, but let's say you haven't gone to a farmer's market, or you don't have a CSA subscription, and you don't, this is something you're interested in, but you don't know how to do it. So Venus, what's your 30-second recommendation for somebody to get, how do they get involved in their food community?
Find a community garden, go as a volunteer, pull some weeds, have some conversations alongside of community gardeners, and stop by your local farmer's market.
Fantastic. Lauren, can you go next?
I think those are great recommendations, and I would say, almost everyone has a website at this point that's in the food space. So, look who's out there. But I think also making sure that when you enter, that you kind of leave your assumptions at the door, and everybody who's interested in food systems, I think, has a lot of ideas about how things should be. And I would just suggest that as you enter, you go in really as a listener and as a weeder. I like that.
Michael, I'll give you the last word since we started with you.
Okay, thanks. I would, on top of all that, I would just recommend and be prepared to be made uncomfortable. I think it's one of the things that's most beneficial of these spaces is it provides a space where people that are different from each other can interact. And what I found, at least in my research, is when you bring these different people together from different ethnicities and religions and class backgrounds, their attitudes suddenly begin to change about people that they've never interacted with before. But you have to be willing to be made uncomfortable and interact with people you do not usually interact with. And that's where you generate that empathy that I talked about earlier.
I love that point. I love uncomfortable conversations. That's the only way to get anywhere. So that's a great point to end on. I want to remind everyone who's been watching that they can purchase Michael's book and use a discount code with the number 4 and then Carolan, his last name. It's a great book. It's easy to read and easy to understand and very impactful. So I hope everyone takes a look. We'll be releasing Nourished Planet later this year in June. And if you'd like a discount for that, just type in food at the islandpress.org website. I want to thank all of our panelists. You were amazing. And it was a really, again, rich and very nourishing conversation. And I want to thank everyone who listened today for participating. We really appreciate it. Sarah, I don't know if you have any final words that you want to share.
Yeah, first, I want to thank you for moderating very expertly. Panelists, yeah, all of our thanks at Island Press go out as well. And yeah, just to round things out, in addition to the books and the discount resource, we also have the slides uploaded as a handout. If I know some people indicated there was some trouble downloading from the platform itself, we will, after the airing, we will have a recording of this webinar as well as the slides. We can post that to our site, which we can go out in a follow-up email tomorrow. So you'll be able to access that. And yeah, there is a survey that will launch at the end. We very much appreciate your feedback. And so thank you all for tuning in. Take care, you all.
Bye.
Bye.